So I play a lot of games, right? Especially indie games. My Steam wishlist is over 100 items long, and my library has also a lot of games, many of which I've actually played. But among those games, which are mainly either really popular or kinda bad, there are a few that stand out as unique. These games are very small in scope, and yet they are some of the most memorable experiences I have ever had in gaming. Think Outer Wilds, right? There's a reason that game is considered a masterpiece. It perfectly manages to strike a chord with so many people, largely just through its beauty. The 3 games I'm going to talk about today had a similar effect on me, though their scopes are much smaller. Now, I don't think I would call these my favorite games. I like to save that title for games that I have kept coming back to for years, or that I keep starting new files in, or that I simply just replay a lot. These games aren't like that. These are just little games I like. Alright, the first of these games is called The Pedestrian. I don't remember how I found this game, but it's a pretty basic premise. You're basically this little guy, like the one you see on bathroom or road signs, and you have to walk around these signs and other various objects, completing puzzles. And being a puzzle platformer, The Pedestrian of course has its main gimmick that you'll see in the trailer and stuff. In this case, it's how you can move around the different rooms that are represented by signs and connect them at different points to move between them in specific orders and activate other level elements such as buttons and obstacles. In my opinion, this works really well. The puzzles in The Pedestrian aren't too difficult, you're not going to get stuck on any of them for very long, but they have enough challenge and, more importantly, variation that, at least to me, they never felt boring. But where this game really shines is not actually in its gameplay, but instead in its atmosphere. Yeah, you probably could have guessed I was going to say that. So, the puzzles of The Pedestrian take place entirely in 2D, on signs as I previously mentioned. However, the backgrounds are fully modeled in 3D to insane detail, and they're full of movement and action. The game takes place in a big city that I think is based on New York, and it feels like it. The scenes where you're on ground level or over the road are chaotic with so much happening in them. And the areas at the beginning of the game that take place in a warehouse and a subway station feel sufficiently empty, but with just enough movement with the conveyor belts and the subway trains to remain interesting. And speaking of the subway, it is used multiple times throughout the game as a seamless transition between different maps, along with other methods like this elevator. These are so cool to me. They're not only useful from a technical perspective to load the next area, but they make the game much more immersive. It's at points like these train scenes where I really get the feeling that our little sign guy is on this massive journey through a world that's not designed for him. It kind of makes you feel like a pedestrian. I just thought that while writing the script. I don't think that's actually the meaning behind the game. But shout out urbanists. Hell yeah. As I mentioned earlier, where The Pedestrian really shines is in its level of detail. There are a million small details, reoccurring elements, and callbacks to previous sections that I could not possibly hope to list them all. But I will tell you some of my favorites. First off, there are a lot of brands in this game. From what I understand, some of these names were picked by Kickstarter backers, which is the same for a lot of the graffiti in the game. And what's cool to me is that these are treated like real companies within the game's universe. They not only appear on their own subsets of products, like Hypo Food Products and Betts Construction Supplies, but they have ads too. You can see these every time you enter the subway or on billboards in the city, and the branding stays consistent. I love that. Another detail that you'll probably actually notice on a first playthrough is how all of the pause screens are fully in-universe. They're displayed on these old TVs which are spread all throughout the world, and no matter where you are in any level, there will always be a TV close enough where the camera can pan over to it. This to me fully completes the game's immersion, and I wish something like this was able to be in more games, because it's just so cool. Now, anyone who has played through The Pedestrian can probably agree that the ending is really good. It has a story and gameplay twist that I won't spoil. I think you should definitely experience it for yourself, but I think it ties the story together pretty well and feels like a fitting final puzzle in the overall context of the game. To end off talking about The Pedestrian, I want to just show you some of my favorite environments from throughout the game. Much of the intro takes place in the warehouse area, which is filled with tall shelves stacked with boxes, as well as conveyor belts moving said boxes. The scenes where you're on ground level moving between the shelves effectively provides the feeling I was talking about earlier, where there's all kinds of chaos happening around you, and it somehow manages to do this without featuring a single person or even much movement at all. And as a bonus, you get this really cool shot of the entire warehouse at the end. The other area I really liked was the first time you're outside in the big city. I don't have much to say about this one since a lot of the stuff I was talking about earlier, I was already thinking about this area when I wrote it, but yeah, it's pretty cool. You should play this game. Now, on to the next one. So the next game on my list is also a puzzle game. However, it has a much more interesting and unique gameplay premise than the Pedestrian. In Chants of Sennaar, you play as a mysterious individual climbing essentially the Tower of Babel, and throughout your journey you will encounter different societies with their own cultures, architecture, and most importantly, languages. The puzzles of the game consist of using dialogue and environmental clues to decipher each language, and use your translations to progress through each area. To my knowledge, this concept has been done before, but it's done really well in this game. The actual act of decoding the text isn't that difficult, as the translations you write down will be automatically shown above the original symbols, and every once in a while you will get the chance to confirm some of your translations by connecting them with the correct images. But they made it really satisfying to solve puzzles in this game. Like whenever you're dealing with incomplete translations, yet still manage to complete a complicated task, you feel like a fucking genius. And then when those translations are later shown to be exactly correct, that's what I live for, okay? Though if you are planning on playing this game, I do want to warn you that this game plays like a point-and-click adventure, which I was initially worried would make it kind of boring to play, but just know that I ended up having a lot of fun beating this game, despite the movement being a bit slow at times. And if you think my aversion to point and clicks is weird, then go play this game right now. It is definitely for you, trust me. Much like every game I'm talking about in this video, sorry, spoilers for the last game I guess, Chants of Sennaar has phenomenal art direction. I actually mentioned this in my previous video when I was talking about monumental architecture, and this game definitely had its fair share of monumentality. It even loves to show it off in scenes like this. I especially like the view from this platform. It shows the vast desert that the tower overlooks, and although we're told throughout the game that we are in fact on a tower, this area reminds us that these entire civilizations are literally on top of each other, and yet they feel so divided. A fact which becomes very important once you start learning the story of this game. Okay, quick side note, when I mentioned Chants of Sennaar in my last video, I got a surprising amount of comments excited about this game, which I did not expect. Like, I thought this was kind of a niche game. Still didn't beat the Voices of the Void guys though, hell yeah! No, but actually, what the fuck is in a reroll? Okay, back to architecture, but this next section will contain spoilers for the kind of things that you'll encounter throughout the game, so here's a timestamp for when I go back to vague discussion. Besides its occasional giganticism, the architecture of Chants of Sennaar provides a really cool connection with the game's world building. Each of the four main peoples of the tower have certain values that are important to them, and these values are reflected in their buildings. The people of the Abbey are the poorest community on the tower, so they build largely out of simple stone or clay, and express beauty through potted plants and cheap instruments. However, the thing they care about the most is devotion to God, as shown by multiple statues depicting the relationship between God and the people of the Abbey. The warriors in the fortress, however, value honor and duty, so as you might expect from a militaristic society, they use striking, brutalist architecture with a focus on open space, which leads to some of the most interesting looking areas in this entire game. The third group on the tower, the bards, are the posh, high society types. They worship beauty and the arts, and so as you can probably expect, they have expensive looking buildings made with valuable materials. In this area, the game also doesn't really do sweeping shots of the landscape. You usually get closer views showing a lot of detail, which is interesting. And finally, the scientists care about science, obviously. So they have a lot of sophisticated technology which they use for their mining operation and, of course, science. And to fit the somewhat steampunk vibe of the scientists, their architecture takes from Victorian age buildings. Chants of Sennaar features the most in-depth story of any of the games I'm talking about in this video. However, it still doesn't have that much, which I kind of appreciate. I feel like you're meant to feel like a foreigner in this world, like you'll never fully understand all the complexities of life in the tower, but you can still connect on a basic human level with all of these different communities. But back to this game's art style, it's so distinct. It uses this really cool cell shading with largely flat colored textures to achieve a very interesting look, much more stylized than the previous game, which is a pattern that will continue going on to the final game I'm going to talk about today. Now, I want to warn you, this last game is a horror game, so if you're a coward like I sometimes am, this game might not be for you. Grun was developed in— Ow! Jesus. Oh, sorry, I'm bad with jump scares. I'm sorry. Het spijt me even. Anyways, Grun is an absurdist horror game based around a time loop, the trope in fiction where the main character is stuck in a cycle where if they die or reach a certain time limit, they will be reset back to the start of the loop. However, usually with any new information they have gathered from previous cycles. Many games use this premise to varying success. 12 Minutes famously attempted to tell a narrative through the time loop structure, which only seemed to harm both the story they were trying to tell and the gameplay itself. However, Outer Wilds from a few years earlier, in my opinion, successfully tells an interesting story through a time loop while still being fun to play. This is largely by giving the player a variety of locations to go to and things to do on each loop that don't necessarily have a specified order that you have to do them in, leading to the sense of openness and discovery that made this game so memorable. Grun is not really similar to either of these games, as it's not attempting to tell any kind of coherent story, but it does use similar tactics to Outer Wilds to base its gameplay off of. In Grun, you can spend most of your attempts just running around and doing anything you can think of with the items provided, and you will still come out of it feeling like you made some progress, and that you can use some of the information you collected in your next run. It also helps that it is completely impossible to tell what matters in this game, so any lead that you have could end up being very important later on. Grun has a system where you will find Polaroids near items or puzzles with a picture of some other location and sometimes a specified time. These obviously work as hints and could be seen as something that trivializes the puzzles, but I think they're done really well here and don't give too much away. They just stop you from having to try literally everything. However, this brings me to one of my favorite aspects of Grun, which is the things it chooses to tell the player. At the very start of the game, the only thing you're able to do is enter the shed, which will function as your home for the remainder of the game. Here you are given a note with instructions to clean the homeowner's garden by Monday using the shears, trowel, and watering can from the shed, with the strict rule of not entering the house under any circumstances, which seems simple enough and will in fact lead to an ending if completed. However, when you look around the shed, the watering can and trowel are nowhere to be found, and a note will appear a bit later that tells you one of them was left in the park. At this point, there is literally nothing you can do to progress. You don't have the tools to do anything, and you are unable to explore any of the surrounding area. That is unless, of course, you enter the house, which would be breaking the one rule the game has given you so far. As you might imagine, this leads to the game's first jump scare. Sure, this scare is not very highbrow horror, and the game will never really go for anything more extreme than this, but it effectively establishes a feeling that you're being watched, which is a theme that you'll continue to see throughout the game. It also makes you start to doubt the information that you're given. If entering the house allowed you to access all this new stuff, then maybe it would be beneficial to disobey other orders you're given, and maybe your main goal isn't really just to garden. Which, by the way, isn't just implied. Whenever you die in this game, you will receive a message informing you of a very strange request. There is an unwanted visitor, disguised as an ordinary earthworm. You have to find a way to get rid of it. Which makes no sense, and you won't be able to do anything with this information for a long time, but it does lead to a cool moment when you actually find the worm, and gives you some kind of overarching goal. Okay, at this point, you probably know what comes next. The graphics in Grun are very cool. It uses low poly models reminiscent of early 3D consoles like the PS1, which is pretty common in modern horror games, and it hides some of the imperfections by using extreme fog and chromatic aberration in the distance, which sometimes leads to a very claustrophobic feeling, but more often than not, it feels more cozy almost. Don't get me wrong, Grun is very unsettling. It's very good at making sure you know that nothing in this world makes sense, and it's very cool whenever you walk through a door and end up in an area that's impossibly different from where you were before. But it also just kind of feels like a little Dutch town that you're visiting. Much like most time loop games, there are specific events that happen at specific times in the loop. In this case, there are people that you can see and even talk to, such as this lady who you can steal a lighter from on Saturday, and these dudes with a scooter who you first see hanging out at this gazebo on Saturday, and then in the park on Sunday, and you can even see them a third time on Sunday night when they, maybe this game isn't actually that cozy. But if a cozy game is what you're looking for, I would highly recommend wishlisting this developer, Sockpop's next game, Burnt Bond. Go check it out. So what do you think of those games? Hopefully I didn't spoil too much of them and you'll still feel inclined to go play them yourself. Feel free to tell me about your favorite niche indie games in the comments, and come back in a few months when I'll talk about something unsettling and maybe even a bit slimy. Anyways, bye.